Well, thank you very much for inviting me here. It's a real honor to be offered a chance to share our zero carbon Britain research with you. We'll look at powering down the amount of energy we need, powering up clean energy, and rethinking food, diets, and land use. And the entire report is free to download for everybody from cat.org.uk. So let's begin by thinking about rising to the climate emergency. Well, it's increasingly clear right across society that we face an extinction crisis and we face a climate emergency. But in order to unpick it, to help bring to life the solutions we need to recognize it as a wicked problem. And by a wicked problem, I mean our external infrastructure, all of the things around us, the physical things we've built over decades, are locked into high carbon ways of doing things. And this exerts a powerful influence on our lives. But also culturally, we've been locked into high carbon mindsets, associating success and status with buy more, spend more, eat more, travel more. But the third reason why it's a wicked problem is that it's actually feeding back on itself as well. If we have ice at the Arctic, ice reflects 90% of the sunshine. If the ice melts, the water absorbs 90% of the sunshine. There are all sorts of feedbacks in it. And we've understood wicked problems for quite a while now. Going back to 1973, Horst Rittel, Melvin Weber developed the term to help us recognize really complex and challenging problems, particularly those with many feedbacks, which are deeply ingrained into the system and with no single solution. So what I want to do is to bring to life some of the wicked solutions we need. The first, probably the most foremost, is if we can't imagine a positive future where we've actually solved this, it's challenging to make it happen. So it's good to dim the lights, light the candles, practice imagining yourself in that positive future, flex those underused brain muscles that can think of a positive future for the Tees Valley. But better still, to have an evidence base, especially if you want to convert your neighbours, your in-laws, or even your politicians. So the first wicked solution I'm offering is the Zero Carbon Britain research we've been doing since 2007. Detailed modelling that can help bring to life elements of the zero carbon future. And one of the useful things it does is if we can imagine ourselves there, it helps bridge this yawning chasm between the politics as usual we've seen for decades and where we need to be, demanded by the physics, the rates of change, the scale of change demanded by the climate science. And in any emergency, physical problems need physical solutions. No amount of talking makes them to go away. That's not to say talking isn't important, it's essential. But the focus of our conversations must be on the rapid actions rooted in the demands and the timeline of the physics. And these are beginning to feed back on itself. But we really need to root any conversations in where we actually are. So the report outlines the current greenhouse gas emissions based on the 2017 data line. It's about 540 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. 80% of it is from burning fossil fuels, 9% from industrial process, management of waste, and about 10% from land use. So the two fundamental processes we explore in this transition, in this wicked solution, is firstly powering down the amount of energy we use to deliver society's goals, while secondly powering up 100% clean energy. And this applies to buildings, transport, energy, land use, food and diets. And the first aspect of it, I think is really important, is to recognize that we're using far more energy than we actually need to deliver society's goals. So let's look at powering down. It's about 1,700 terawatt hours of energy we use in a typical year. Now it breaks down into four key categories: heating buildings, all the appliances that happen in buildings, the amount industry uses, and the amount we use for moving ourselves and moving stuff around. So by rethinking how we use energy, we can make a 60% reduction. But you might notice that the industrial emissions have actually gone up because we recognize during this transition, we are going to be really busy. But in other areas, we can make massive reductions if we do the right things. For example, considering a typical house built on the outskirts of Middlesbrough in the 90s. If we look at buildings, I mean, the vast majority of the buildings that we'll have in the zero carbon future are the buildings we already have. So this typical house, average UK house, it's about 10,000 kilowatt hours per year of energy to heat it, because it was designed way below the standards that we could design them today. Insulate the walls, the roof, the floor, better windows and doors, reduce draft leakage, air leakage, better controls so you're only heating the rooms you intend to use, and slightly lower internal temperatures. By investing in that transition, we can bring it down from 10,000 kilowatt hours per year to about 4,000 kilowatt hours per year. Now that's an investment, not a cost, because that house is going to be there for the next 30 years, running on a lot less energy, so we can use those savings to fund the transition. Another power down example is transport. We're hauling huge amounts of things around the planet, around the country that we don't need to move. We can supply locally. Lots of people were traveling in individual cars that didn't need to. So by traveling less and traveling differently, and in our scenario, we estimate about a 13% reduction in the average number of miles, not massive, much less than we've seen in the recent few months. But then by improving efficiency, by switching to light, smart electric vehicles, we can get that down to about 78%. Now, perhaps the most challenging one was reducing aviation, because frequent flyers were flying all around the world, hen parties, stag parties in New York. We can still manufacture enough clean aviation fuel so you can still have a long haul flight every couple of years, but we need to share that out fairly. Then, as we're powering down, we can also power up clean energy. It doesn't happen afterwards, it happens at the same time, simultaneously. So thinking about the UK, running 100% renewables, well, in the work that we've done, the key question that people ask us is, yes, we know renewables work, we know renewables are getting cheaper, but can you actually keep the lights on in the hospitals 100% of the time? So we spent a lot of time researching and delving deeply into that problem to really understand where we are with it. And what we recognized is that just saying, yes, we can do it, and this is the amount of energy in a year, doesn't really convince people. What convinces people is hourly modeling. So we explored modeling an entire year, hour by hour. But then we recognized years change from year to year. Some years it's really cold in the winter and not at all windy. Other years it's really warm in the winter and very windy. So we actually used 10 years worth of hourly data from 2002 to 2011 to model the amount of supply and demand that the UK needs in terms of 100% renewable supply. So we looked at 2 offshore wind farm sites and we correlated the data, and we could then have an hourly prediction for what those sites would generate. Now, predicting what the wind's going to do a week ahead is really unreliable. Predicting the wind a day ahead is a lot more reliable. Predicting what the wind's going to do 1 hour ahead is actually quite reliable. So you can begin to think an hour ahead what the wind's going to do. So we looked at the UK. We said most of the energy is up in the top around Scotland. So we explored a model with most of the offshore wind farms up there. But we found that that produces very big peaks and troughs. So what we did was we spread them top, bottom, and left, right. And by spreading them out, you actually level out the hourly supply. Because if you look at the hourly output from renewables, you add to the wind, solar, hydro, all sorts of other renewables. You can come up with an hour by hour detailed model. But then you have to contrast that with your hour by hour demand model, because even if you power down demand, it still varies with the time of day, it still varies with the season. So we began to match the two. And the big thing about having a substantial offshore wind is you get most of your energy when you need most of your energy in the winter months. But if the model was for Greece or for Latin America, it would be a very different model. This model is customized to the UK. So what we did is we modeled energy demand, electricity demand, and electricity supply, hour by hour by hour. Then we identified where there's a shortfall and where there's a surplus. Now, obviously the shortfalls are problems, but if you're managing the electricity grid, you can't pump more energy into the grid than the grid's using, else the voltage and frequency become unstable. So dealing with the peaks is every bit as big a challenge as dealing with the troughs. So what we did is we looked at all the available technologies for either shifting the load or capturing it, storing it, and building up an energy reserve that we can deploy during the winter. So what we found is that at least half of the surplus energy, we can export that through high voltage DC grids between wind farms to Nordic countries that are building Europe's pump storage battery system that were very keen to buy what we want to export. But the other half, you can actually use that electrical energy to split water into hydrogen. It's called electrolysis. It's sort of low-level physics. And then you could use that hydrogen as an energy store, and we looked at that. But actually, it would require a huge investment in new gas storage, new gas power stations. So what we found was a really interesting shift, that you can actually capture carbon out of the atmosphere from sewage, from biomass, add that carbon to the hydrogen to make synthetic biogas, essentially synthetic methane. It's like natural gas, but it's the surplus energy from big renewables stored, but upgraded by capturing carbon out of the atmosphere. And so when you burn it, you release the carbon back to the atmosphere and it all cycles around again. You're not drilling into the ground and letting out carbon that's been in there for a long, long time. So what we found with that is you can actually make also synthetic liquid fuels as well to fill the gaps between the big renewables. And we found there were very good examples of this. The Store and Go project, a consortium of 27 partners from 6 European countries, they've got these systems running up to 1 megawatt. So basically, to sum up the power up, power down, 74% of the time in the model there was a surplus, 26% there was a shortfall, but short-term storage like the Norway pump storage or moving loads around, giving like a smart incentive to industry or to vehicle chargers or to people wanting to do their washing. If you use the energy at this time, you get a better price. That could bring it down to about 11%, and there's enough carbon neutral synthetic gas to cover this. But if we're going to capture carbon out of the atmosphere to upgrade the hydrogen, it requires rethinking land use. But we also need to rethink land use in any case, because 10% of emissions come from land use. So what we did is we built a map of Britain based around how the land is used. We used 1 mega hectare blocks and we coloured them according to how land's used to help us understand how we're using the land in Britain. So the grey is about 6% of our land is urban. The pink is the land we use as grassland for livestock. The yellow is the land we use to grow food, to feed to the livestock. The orange is the food that we eat ourselves. And then you've got harvested forest, mixed grasses, and managed conserved. So once we've got a deeper understanding of how we use land, then we think, well, what are we using land for? So we employed a professional dietitian who helped us understand the mix of the 4 different types of food we should be eating and what we're actually eating. So the 4 different types of foods are starchy foods, high protein foods, high fats and sugars, and fruit and vegetables. And the inner circle is the right mix of those 4 around the government sort of healthy, balanced diet, their Eat Well guide. But the average diet today, we should be eating 39% fruit and veg, we're only eating 9%. We should be eating 5% high fats and sugars, we're eating 43%. So we suggest in the Zero Carbon Britain diet that we're offering as a provocation, if we move much nearer towards the right mix of those 4 different types of foods and a healthy portion size, what effect does that have on land use? What we found was really exciting. Switching to a healthier diet for human beings can actually free up lots of land. So comparing the land use that we had today in that last model, in that last sort of rectangle, taking out the key elements, and then moving to Zero Carbon Britain's suggested diet, what we find is that we can switch from growing food to feed to animals to growing more food that we can eat ourselves so we can actually get the protein in a different way. But it doesn't mean we have to give up meat or be vegetarian or vegan. We're just eating the right amount of meat, the right amount of high fats and sugars. But the exciting thing is it frees up lots of the pink. So we can use the grassland for different things. So we explored how we can use that to create new income streams for rural areas, how we can do that to create space for biodiversity. Firstly, some of the pink gets repurposed in capturing the carbon using biomass and waste to upgrade the hydrogen to synthetic gas or synthetic liquid fuels. So it's about 3 squares got used for that. But then there's still some pink spare, so we explored how we can use some of the surplus grassland to double the forest area of the UK, because the European average is way above what we are. So we can double the amount of forestry. We can increase the use of wood products in buildings and import a lot less and create income streams. And we can restore about 50% of the peatlands. So in doing that, we can actually move from where we are today, 100% renewables, different types of improved agricultural systems, more efficient industrial process, but also you notice the other side of zero. Some carbon is captured by natural systems, but we can increase that if we double the forest cover. So in doing that, we can describe an endpoint that gets us to net zero. Now, there are more wicked solutions that I think it's important to highlight as well. Because wicked solutions have feedbacks. They feed back on themselves. And if we look at the cost of 2 solutions, when CAT was founded in 1975, it would have been about $100 for a photovoltaic panel. That's dropped per watt enormously and kick-started a huge wave of installations. Similarly, there's been massive falls in onshore wind and in offshore wind. Offshore wind costs have fallen 32% in a year and 12% compared with the first half of 2019. And even during the difficult times at the moment, onshore wind energy, the investment's pouring into it, because the more we invest in it, the cheaper it gets. The cheaper it gets, the more we build, we build them better, larger scale, more efficiently, the cheaper it gets. So these sorts of solutions are feeding back on themselves, and we need to create that sort of feedback in all sorts of other things like building retrofit or land restoration. And another wicked solution that's feeding back on itself is this new leadership. If we weren't in lockdown this year, school children would have been on strike. Many deeply committed people across the country would be taken to the streets, calling for the emergency action. This has fed back. Since this time, well, probably since about March 2019, we've seen massive feedbacks. The climateemergency.uk website has a map where it maps out all of the councils that have declared a climate emergency, that are making action plans. So I sort of screenshotted it over a period of time, about 7 months towards the end of 2019, and the feedback was amazing. And lots of councils, the vast majority of councils have now declared an emergency. And then if a council or a citizen action group or wildlife trust declares a climate emergency, they can act in 4 key directions. They can act down on the things that they can do directly. They can lobby upwards, they can work sideways with their partners, and they can train themselves, and from the CEO downwards, in the basic carbon literacy. Wicked solution 4, the real life innovative projects we need are ready to go. Pioneering groups have proven retrofit, community hydro, getting more people cycling, natural regeneration schemes. It's all out there. The exciting, probably the most exciting wicked solution is multi-solving, is not just thinking about the carbon reductions, but thinking about the additional benefits to society. So the trick is to have an interdisciplinary mindset, to think outside silos, to talk to different departments, so that we can reboot the economy as we do this. We can create jobs with a sense of purpose. We can reduce fuel poverty, improve our diets, increase active mobility, reduce unnecessary travel, enhance spaces for biodiversity, restore the UK soils, and increase the resilience to the climate and other emergencies. So one personal example I had was when I was shopping in the local store, I came across a packet of radishes that had been grown in Peru, and there's absolutely no reason why we can't grow radishes in the polytunnel in my country. So in the zero carbon Britain scenario, the change of diets that we're suggesting reduces food imports from 42% to 17%. So we can still have chocolate, tea and coffee, but we get it sustainably in a fairly traded way. Another example of multi-solving is the Welsh Government has earmarked 5 million to create a national forest stretching the length and breadth of Wales. Now that's got carbon capture potential, it's got space for biodiversity, but also space for human beings to interact with natural systems. So all of this can begin to reduce our imports, relocalize supply chains, on-farm renewables, natural carbon capture and storage, increase forestry and wood products. There's all sorts of opportunities. So to help support people engage with this, we've created a zero carbon hub, and we're launching a digital hub soon where you'll be able to access information, and an innovation lab that's going to begin to explore some of the really wicked problems. Next week, we've got a 2-day Zero Carbon Britain live online training course where you can join lots of other people from all sectors of society, delving into the detail of this, but also finding out what other people are doing. So the key information that we have is solutions focused, and it's all available free of charge for you. You can download all of the Zero Carbon Britain reports. You can access the Hub and Innovation Lab. You can even do a postgraduate degree in sustainability. The short course next week, you can sign up for that and ask questions to our free information service. You just go to cat.org.uk. And I look forward to seeing you sometime online or face-to-face at CAT. Thank you very much.